The room doesn't buzz with noise, it hums with power. A long, polished mahogany table stretches across the center of the boardroom, reflecting the ceiling lights like a mirror. Leather chairs are filled with executives in tailored suits, their posture confident, their expressions controlled. This is not a place where people raise their voices. This is a place where decisions are made quietly, and lives are changed without warning. At the head of the table sits the millionaire, immaculate suit, gold watch, the kind of man who has never had to ask for permission in his life. The doors open and everything shifts. A black teenager steps inside. No entourage. No designer labels screaming for attention. Just a calm presence, a folder held close to her chest, and eyes that take in the room without fear. A few executives exchange glances. Someone clears their throat. This is not who they were expecting. The millionaire leans back in his chair, already amused, already dismissive. He looks her up and down, not curious, not cautious, just entertained. He laughs first, a soft laugh, confident, contagious. "I think you're in the wrong room," he says, voice dripping with polite condescension. He gestures vaguely toward the door, as if correcting a mistake. A few people chuckle. Others stay silent, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge him. He asks who let her in. He asks if she's looking for an internship interview. He asks if security checked her credentials. Each question lands like a test she was never meant to pass. Then she speaks. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't rush. She simply says she's here because she has a claim to the company, not a job, not a scholarship, ownership. The word hangs in the air for a split second before the room reacts. The millionaire laughs again, louder this time. He repeats her words as if they're a joke, tasting them, enjoying the absurdity. "The heiress?" He says, eyebrows raised. "You?" He implies she's confused, suggests she's been misled, hints without saying it outright that she's lying. His tone is smooth, practiced, almost kind, but the message is clear. People like her don't belong in rooms like this. He talks about legacy, about bloodlines, about how companies like this don't just fall into the hands of strangers. He tells her she'd be careful making claims she can't prove. Throughout it all, she doesn't argue. She doesn't defend herself. She doesn't explain her background or beg to be believed. She waits. When the laughter dies down and the room settles, she looks directly at the table, at all of them, and says just one sentence. "Just check the records. No anger, no fear, just certainty." The millionaire smirks, waving a hand as if to move things along. He thinks this is over. He thinks the room belongs to him. What no one in that room knew was that this meeting would end his career. This story isn't just about money or even about power. It is about how quickly people decide who matters and who doesn't based on what they see in the first few seconds. It's about prejudice that hides behind polished language, about assumptions made in rooms where no one thinks they'll ever be challenged. And most of all, it's about what happens when those assumptions collide head-on with the truth. At the center of it all is a man who built his reputation brick by brick. The millionaire didn't inherit his influence, he earned it, or so the story goes. Years of ruthless decisions, calculated risks, and perfectly timed moves turned him into one of the most powerful figures in the company. Boardrooms were his territory. Conversations bent around his opinions. When he spoke, people listened, not because they liked him, but because ignoring him came with consequences. He was respected, feared, and deeply aware of both. Control wasn't just something he had. It was something he expected. Then there's her. The teenager doesn't fit the picture anyone in that room has in mind. She's young, too young, in their eyes, to carry any real authority. She doesn't wear expensive clothes or announce herself with confidence designed to impress. There's no visible wealth, no polished entourage, no signals that usually demand respect in spaces like this. And that's exactly why she's underestimated before she even speaks. In a room full of power, She looks like an interruption, a mistake, someone who wandered in from the outside world and doesn't understand the rules. But this meeting is not routine. What is at stake isn't just a vote on paper. It is the future of the company itself. The board is gathered to finalize a decision that will determine ownership, control, and legacy. An inheritance dispute has surfaced, one tied to the company's founder and records that haven't been publicly discussed in years. Whoever the board recognizes today will gain influence that reshapes everything: leadership, direction, and power. Careers will rise or collapse based on what's decided in this room. The millionaire believes the outcome is already locked in. He's confident because he's always been confident, and because confidence has never failed him before. The teenager believes something else entirely. She believes the truth doesn't need volume to be heard. She believes documentation speaks louder than status. And she believes that when the records are opened, everything will change. So the question becomes unavoidable. What happens when someone who has spent a lifetime controlling the narrative comes face to face with proof he can't talk his way around? What happens when arrogance meets facts that don't care who's in charge? And what happens when the person everyone dismissed turns out to be the only one who actually belongs there? Because once the truth enters the room, power doesn't get to decide what happens next. Long before this meeting ever took place, the millionaire learned one lesson better than any other. Power belongs to those who take it and never apologize. His story is the kind people love to repeat at conferences and business dinners. A rise from modest beginnings to staggering success through ambition, intelligence, and relentless drive. He built his fortune by spotting weakness early, exploiting hesitation, and never allowing sentiment to interfere with profit. To many outside the room, he was a symbol of what determination could achieve. To those inside it, he was something else entirely. In boardrooms, he didn't negotiate, he dictated. His presence alone set the tone. Conversation slowed when he spoke, laughter stopped when he frowned, and decisions seemed to form around his opinions before votes were even cast. He had perfected the art of dominance without ever raising his voice. A slight lean forward meant pressure. A raised eyebrow meant warning. Silence from him was often more threatening than anger. People learned quickly that opposing him required courage most didn't have or careers they were willing to lose. He valued loyalty, but only the kind that came with obedience. Executives who agreed with him were rewarded with influence and access. Those who challenged him found themselves sidelined, removed from key projects, or quietly pushed out. It was never personal. He'd say, just business. But everyone understood the message. There was room for many voices in theory, but only one that truly mattered in practice: his. His intolerance for challenges wasn't loud or explosive. It was surgical. He dismissed opposing ideas with polite smiles, reframed disagreements as misunderstandings, and subtly questioned the competence of anyone who stood in his way. Over time, resistance faded. The board grew used to following his lead, not because he was always right, but because disagreeing with him came at a cost no one wanted to pay. And then there were the people he believed didn't belong. He had a particular way of dealing with them. Interns who spoke out of turn. Junior staff who asked too many questions. Outsiders who wandered into spaces reserved for power. He treated them all the same, with a thin layer of courtesy masking unmistakable dismissal. He didn't yell. He didn't insult directly. He simply made it clear that their presence was inconvenient, their opinions irrelevant, their confidence misplaced. In his world, hierarchy was sacred, and anyone who failed to recognize their position deserved to be reminded of it. That mindset extended beyond job titles. It shaped how he saw authority, legitimacy, and worth. Power, to him, had a look. It wore tailored suits. It spoke with certainty. It arrived through the right doors and carried the right names. Anything outside that image was suspect, temporary, easily removed. So when the meeting was scheduled, he walked into the boardroom already convinced of the outcome. The dispute on the agenda felt like a formality, an inconvenience delaying the inevitable. He had reviewed summaries, spoken privately with key board members, and reassured himself that everything was under control. The records, as far as he knew, supported his position. The legacy of the company, he believed, rested safely in hands like his, experienced, proven, unquestioned. He sat at the table with the relaxed confidence of someone who had already won. His posture was loose, his tone casual. This wasn't a battlefield to him. It was routine. Another meeting where he would steer the conversation, guide the vote, and walk out unchanged. He didn't expect surprises. He didn't fear them, certainly not from a teenager. In his mind, the idea that someone young, quiet, and visibly out of place could disrupt years of control was laughable. The system had always worked in his favor. People like him wrote the rules, or at least knew how to bend them. He trusted the process because the process had never betrayed him before. That certainty, the unshakable belief that power guaranteed protection, was the foundation of everything he did. It's what allowed him to mock without hesitation, dismiss without reflection, and assume without verifying. Sitting in that boardroom, surrounded by people who had deferred to him for years, he felt untouchable. What he didn't realize was that his greatest strength, his absolute confidence, was about to become his most dangerous weakness. The building itself was designed to intimidate. Glass walls rose high into the sky, reflecting the city below like a mirror that only welcomed certain people inside. The lobby smelled faintly of polished stone and money, quiet, controlled, deliberate. Employees moved with purpose, heels clicking softly against marble floors, voices kept low even when laughing. This was a place where belonging was understood without being spoken. When the teenager stepped through the revolving doors, the rhythm shifted. She paused for just a moment, not because she was unsure, but because security noticed her. The guards exchanged a glance that said everything without a word. She didn't look lost, yet she didn't look like everyone else either. No badge hanging from her neck, no corporate uniform, no assistant trailing behind her. One guard asked who she was here to see. His tone wasn't hostile, but it wasn't welcoming either. It carried that familiar edge of doubt reserved for people who don't immediately fit. She answered calmly, giving a name and stating she had a meeting upstairs. The guard hesitated. Fingers hovered over the keyboard longer than necessary. Another glance. A brief pause that stretched just enough to be felt. People walking past slowed, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Finally, after checking a list twice, the guard nodded and handed her a temporary access badge. The hesitation lingered even as he waved her through, as if the building itself was unsure what to do with her. As she moved toward the elevators, whispers followed. Not loud enough to be obvious, but not quiet enough to be hidden. Questions floated in pieces. Who's that? Is she with legal? Did someone bring their kid to work? A woman in a sharp blazer glanced at her shoes, then at her face, then away again. A man checked his phone as if expecting clarification to appear there. No one asked her directly. They just watched, quietly trying to place her in a role that made sense to them. Inside the elevator, the silence was heavy. Executives stared straight ahead, pretending not to notice her reflection in the mirrored walls. One person offered a polite smile, confused, uncertain before looking back down. Another shifted uncomfortably, clearly wondering if she'd pressed the wrong button. When the doors opened on the executive floor, several people stepped out, assuming she would remain behind. She didn't. She followed them out, her step steady, her posture relaxed. That's when the tension sharpened. As she walked down the corridor toward the boardroom, assumptions hardened. Someone whispered that she must be an assistant delivering documents. Another suggested she was an intern tagging along for experience. One board member quietly asked if HR had changed policy again. No one considered the possibility that she belonged there in her own right. The idea simply didn't register. When the boardroom doors came into view, the confusion intensified. A staff member glanced at her badge and frowned. Another leaned toward a colleague, murmuring something under their breath. The door opened, and the conversation inside slowed as people noticed her presence. Chairs shifted. Eyes lifted. The room collectively paused, trying to process what they were seeing. And yet she remained calm. Her face showed no irritation, no nervousness, no urgency to explain herself. She didn't rush. She didn't apologize for being there. She didn't scan the room for approval. She simply walked in as if she had done this before, even if no one believed she had. The contrast was striking. Around her, tension tightened shoulders and stiffened expressions. Inside her, there was only quiet focus. Someone assumed she was there to take notes. Another gestured toward an empty chair near the wall, the kind reserved for observers. A voice suggested she wait outside until the real meeting began. Each assumption piled onto the last, building a narrative that made her easier to dismiss. But she didn't correct them. She took in the room instead. The polished table, the familiar faces from photographs, the man at the head of the table whose confidence filled the space. She listened. She waited. And with every second she remained silent, the discomfort grew. Because her calm didn't match the story they were telling themselves. People who don't belong usually show it. They fidget. They over-explain. They look for exits. She did none of that. Her stillness unsettled them more than any confrontation could have. It raised an unspoken question no one wanted to voice. What if this wasn't a mistake? By the time the doors closed behind her, the room was already off balance. Not because she had spoken, but because her presence challenged assumptions everyone had made without realizing it. And as the meeting prepared to begin, one thing became clear, even if no one was ready to admit it yet. She hadn't walked into that building by accident. The moment the meeting formally begins, the millionaire takes control the way he always does, without asking for it. He leans forward slightly, fingers resting on the table, eyes scanning the room before landing on her. Not with curiosity, with amusement. There's a pause, deliberate and calculated, just long enough to make her the center of attention without inviting her to speak. He smiles, not a warm smile, the kind that signals he's about to attain himself. Before we continue, he says, voice smooth and confident, I think we should address an obvious confusion. His gaze flicks toward her badge, then back to her face. Young lady, this meeting is restricted. Are you here with someone? The words are polite. The message is not. A few heads turn toward her. Others look down at their papers, already uncomfortable. She answers calmly, stating her name and saying she's here regarding the ownership discussion on the agenda. She doesn't elaborate. She doesn't justify. She simply states it as fact. That's when the smile widens. Ownership? He repeats, letting the word linger as if tasting it. A soft chuckle escapes him. I'm sorry, ownership of what exactly? He glances around the table, inviting the room in on the joke. Because if there's been a clerical error, we should clear it up now. A couple of board members laugh. Not loudly, nervously. The kind of laughter that signals alignment, not humor. She responds again, just as calmly. She says she's there as the rightful heiress to the company's founding shares. This time, the reaction is louder. He laughs openly now, shaking his head as if genuinely impressed by the audacity. That's quite a claim, he says. Do you have any idea how many people think they re-entitled to something they didn't earn? His tone sharpens just slightly. This company has a history, a legacy. These things don't just appear. The microaggressions creep in quietly at first. He asks where she got her information, implying someone must have filled her head with ideas she doesn't understand. He wonders aloud if she's been misled by a distant relative, or worse, by the internet. He suggests, still smiling, that she's confusing a scholarship fund or charitable program with actual ownership. Each comment lands with precision. Never overtly cruel, always dismissive. He never calls her a liar outright. He doesn't have to. The implication hangs heavy in the room. One board member shifts uncomfortably. Another clears their throat but says nothing. Someone else glances at the door, as if wondering how this situation hasn't been handled already. But no one steps in. Silence becomes permission. Encouraged, he presses further. He questions her age. Wonders aloud if she's even old enough to understand legal documents. He makes a comment about how confident kids are these days, drawing another ripple of laughter. This time, fewer people join in. The room is splitting, some entertained, some uneasy, all watching. Through it all, she doesn't rise to it. She doesn't interrupt. She doesn't match his tone. She doesn't explain her family history or defend her intelligence. She sits still, hands folded, eyes steady. When she does speak, it's only to clarify a fact or restate her claim. No emotion, no apology. That restraint unsettles him. He's used to reactions, anger, embarrassment, desperation. He's used to people shrinking when challenged. Her refusal to do so feels like defiance, even though she hasn't raised her voice once. So he escalates, turning the mockery more public, more pointed. "If you're serious," he says, leaning back in his chair, "then surely you won't mind us involving security, or legal, or perhaps social services." A few people stiffen at that, because making false claims like this can have consequences. The room goes quiet. This time, no one laughs. She looks at him, not offended, not frightened, just patient. When she speaks, it's the fewest words she's used so far. She says she understands the seriousness of her claim. She says she welcomes verification. And then she adds, softly but clearly, "That's why I'm here." No argument, no plea, just confidence. The contrast is stark. His voice fills the room, layered with sarcasm and certainty. Hers barely rises above conversation, but it doesn't waver. The more he tries to diminish her, the more exposed the imbalance becomes. Some board members begin avoiding his eyes. Others watch her closely now, curiosity replacing dismissal. Still, he believes he's winning. He assumes the room is on his side, that authority and volume will carry the day like they always have. He assumes she'll eventually crack, apologize, or leave. What he doesn't realize, what he can't see yet, is that every word he's spoken has been witnessed, remembered, and quietly weighed. And while he mocks, the ground beneath his certainty is already beginning to shift. The shift begins the moment she decides to speak without being prompted. Not louder, not sharper, just clearer. The room is still buzzing with the residue of mockery when she straightens slightly in her chair and addresses the table, not him, not any single person, but the institution itself. She states her full name. Then she states another name, the founder's name. The effect is immediate and electric. Chairs stop creaking. Pens pause mid-note. A few heads lift sharply, as if pulled by a string. The name carries weight in this room. It's etched into the building, printed on plaques, spoken with reverence at anniversaries and shareholder meetings. It's a name tied to legacy, vision, and the myth of how the company began. She explains her connection simply. No drama, no embellishment. She identifies herself as the founder's direct heir through a branch of the family few people openly discussed and even fewer acknowledged. She references a trust established decades ago, one that remained dormant, quietly accruing value while the company grew. She doesn't recite the details. She doesn't need to. She says enough to signal that she knows exactly what she's talking about. For a moment, the room forgets how to react. Disbelief rolls in waves. A board member exhales sharply. Another shakes their head, muttering that this can't be right. Someone whispers, "That's impossible," as if saying it aloud might make it true. Eyes dart from her to the millionaire, waiting for him to laugh it off the way he has everything else. He doesn't laugh right away. Instead, his smile tightens. He repeats the founder's name slowly, as if correcting her pronunciation. "That's a very serious claim," he says, voice cooling. The amusement is gone now, replaced by irritation. That name has been used before. People come out of the woodwork every few years with stories and documents and distant connections. He looks around the table, seeking agreement. We've dealt with this before. It's a distraction. A few board members nod automatically. Others hesitate. She doesn't interrupt. She lets him speak. When he finishes, she adds one more piece, something only someone with direct access would know. A detail about the trust structure. A clause that was never made public. A reference to a private amendment signed late in the founder's life. That's when the disbelief sharpens into something else. Unease. Because this isn't information you find online. This isn't something you guess. It's something you inherit. The millionaire feels it too, though he won't admit it. His jaw tightens. His fingers tap against the table, faster than before. The room is no longer playing along, and he senses control slipping. So he does what he always does when challenged. He moves to shut it down. "This is inappropriate," he says firmly. "We are not entertaining unscheduled claims from unverified individuals." He turns toward the door. Security should have handled this before she ever reached this floor. The word security lands like a threat. He stands slightly, just enough to assert dominance. "This meeting is being disrupted. I'm requesting that she be escorted out immediately." A silence follows, heavier than the last. No one moves. He repeats himself, sharper this time. He demands intervention, framing it as procedure, as protocol, as protection for the company. He suggests the teen is being exploited. He implies the board is being manipulated. He says removing her is the responsible choice. But the room isn't responding the way it usually does. A legal advisor shifts in their seat. A senior board member raises a hand, not to agree, but to pause him. Another asks, carefully, whether the trust records she referenced have ever been fully reviewed. Someone else suggests quietly that verification might be prudent before taking action. The millionaire turns incredulous. "You can't be serious," he says. "We're entertaining a story over decades of established leadership." She watches all of it without expression. When she finally speaks again, it's not to defend herself. It's to clarify her intention. She says she's not here to cause a scene. She's here because the board meeting was the appropriate place to address ownership. She says she welcomes any verification process the board deems necessary. She repeats that her claim is documented, recorded, filed. And then she adds one final sentence, steady and unflinching. "If I didn't belong here," she says, "none of this would make you uncomfortable." That lands harder than any accusation. The millionaire freezes for half a second, just long enough for the room to notice. His demand for removal hangs unanswered in the air. The board hasn't decided yet, but something has already changed. Authority is no longer flowing in one direction. Doubt has entered the room, and doubt is dangerous to people who rely on certainty. Security never arrives. Instead, files are requested. Legal counsel opens a folder. And for the first time since the meeting began, the millionaire realizes he may no longer be in control of how this ends. For the first time since the meeting began, momentum slows, not because the millionaire allows it, but because someone else takes control. A senior board member, one who has sat through decades of votes and crises, lifts a hand gently. The gesture isn't dramatic, but it's authoritative. It carries the quiet weight of experience. The room stills. "Before we do anything further," the board member says carefully, "we need to pause." The word lands heavily. Pause. Not dismiss. Not remove. Pause. The millionaire turns sharply, disbelief flashing across his face. He starts to speak, but the board member continues, eyes never leaving the table. "If there's even a chance this claim intersects with the founder's estate, then we have an obligation to verify it. Not later. Now. That's when the air truly changes." Legal counsel, who has remained mostly silent until now, straightens in their seat. This is their moment, the line where procedure overrides personality. They clear their throat and speak in measured tones, reminding the room that ownership disputes tied to trusts and legacy clauses aren't resolved through opinion. They're resolved through documentation, records, verification. The millionaire scoffs quietly, muttering that this is unnecessary, that it's a waste of time, that the company has safeguards against exactly this kind of disruption. But no one is laughing now. No one echoes his confidence. The board member who called for the pause nods toward legal counsel. Let's see the records. A request is made. Then another. Assistants move quickly, but with visible tension. Laptops are opened. Secure database is accessed. Old files, some rarely touched, are requested from digital archives. Names are entered. Dates are cross-checked. A trust registry is pulled up on the screen at the far end of the room. Time stretches. Minutes pass that feel longer than the entire meeting before it. No one speaks unless necessary. The soft tapping of keys becomes unbearably loud. Someone shifts in their chair, then stops. Another exhales slowly, trying to remain composed. The teenager sits quietly, exactly as she has from the start. Hands folded, eyes forward, waiting. The millionaire, meanwhile, grows restless. He leans back, then forward again. His foot taps against the floor. He checks his watch once, then again. He tries to reassert control with small interruptions, questions framed as clarifications, comments framed as impatience. "How long is this going to take?" he asks at one point. "We have real business to conduct." Legal counsel doesn't look up. "This is real business," they reply. That shuts him up for the moment. Names appear on the screen. Variations of the founder's surname. Trust amendments dated decades earlier. Annotations referencing beneficiaries, contingencies, and legal guardianship provisions. Some entries are routine. Others are flagged. The room leans in, unconsciously drawn closer as the pieces begin aligning. A junior legal assistant hesitates, then quietly points something out to the lead counsel. A line item. A name that matches hers, not exactly, but close enough to matter. Counsel asks for additional verification. Birth records, guardianship filings, a sealed addendum. The tension tightens. A board member whispers, "That can't be right." Another responds, "But what if it is?" No one looks at the millionaire now. All eyes are on the screen, on the files, on the possibility unfolding in real time. The power he once commanded is suspended, hanging uselessly while facts take center stage. He senses it slipping and tries one last tactic: dismissal. "This proves nothing," he says sharply. "Similar names exist everywhere. You're reading too much into coincidence." Legal counsel finally looks directly at him. "We're not done," they say. Silence follows. The teenager doesn't react. She doesn't lean forward or smile or prepare a speech. She doesn't need to. This part of the process was never about persuasion. It was about patience. She has it. The room doesn't. Another minute passes, then another. Finally, legal counsel exhales slowly and nods once, eyes narrowing at the screen. "There's a matching trust reference," they say. "It's dormant but valid. And it links directly to the founder's private estate filings." A murmur ripples through the room. The senior board member presses their lips together, visibly processing. Someone rubs their temples. Another board member stares down at the table, as if seeing it for the first time. The millionaire doesn't speak. His face has gone still, not calm, but rigid. The pause has done its damage. Because pauses give truth room to surface. And as the seconds drag on, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. This meeting is no longer under anyone's control. Not his, not hers. Only the records decide what happens next. The confirmation doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in layers, slow, methodical, unavoidable. Legal counsel scrolls carefully through the final set of documents, cross-referencing dates. Signatures and identifiers with practiced precision. No one interrupts now. Even the faint sounds of the building, the distant hum of air conditioning, the muted city beyond the glass feel louder than before. This trust, legal counsel begins, voice steady, was established by the founder under a private addendum to his primary estate plan. They pause, allowing the weight of that sentence to settle. It names a single beneficiary. That beneficiary is present in this room. Every head turns. The teenager doesn't move. She doesn't straighten. She doesn't react at all. She has already lived with this truth long before anyone else believed it. Legal counsel continues, confirming what each document supports. Birth records align. Guardianship filings match the trust conditions. The dormant shares long assumed irrelevant are validated, their value adjusted over time as the company expanded. Signatures are authenticated, verified against known samples from the founder's later years. Even the private amendment she mentioned earlier appears on screen, exactly where she said it would be. There is no longer any ambiguity. The senior board member exhales slowly, removing their glasses. Then it's clear, they say quietly. She is the legal heiress. The words land with finality. No one challenges them. No one laughs. No one speaks at all. Across the table, the millionaire's confidence evaporates in real time. The relaxed posture collapses inward. His shoulders stiffen. The faint color drains from his face, leaving behind something pale and tight. His eyes flick back to the screen, then to legal counsel, then to the board searching for disagreement, for delay, for anything that might rescue him. There is nothing. The room no longer belongs to him. Legal counsel outlines the implications calmly, almost clinically. Ownership shares tied to the trust grant her a controlling interest. Certain decisions made in recent years will require review. Authority shifts immediately and irrevocably. The board listens in stunned silence, absorbing the consequences as they unfold. The millionaire opens his mouth once, as if to speak, then closes it. Whatever argument he had prepared, whatever authority he thought he could summon, has dissolved. Power, stripped of belief, is just noise. And now even the noise is gone. Silence fills the boardroom. Not the uncomfortable silence from earlier, charged with mockery and tension, but a heavier one. A silence that marks the end of certainty, the end of dominance, the end of a story everyone thought they knew. The teenager finally lifts her gaze, meeting the eyes around the table. Not triumph, not resentment, just presence. She has nothing to prove now. The proof is already on the screen, signed decades ago by a man whose legacy this company still claims to honor. The senior board member clears their throat. On behalf of the board, they say, choosing each word carefully, we formally recognize you as the rightful heir under the founder's trust. The sentence echoes longer than it should. The millionaire doesn't look at her. He stares straight ahead, jaw clenched, as if staring hard enough might rewind the last 10 minutes. His hands, once so steady, grip the arms of his chair. The room has watched him command meetings for years. Now it watches him unravel without a single word spoken against him. Arrogance has no defense against documentation. A few board members shift in their seats, visibly recalibrating. Expressions change, some from guilt, others from shock, a few from quiet respect. They realize what they witnessed earlier, what they allowed, what they laughed at. The silence becomes an unspoken reckoning. Legal counsel closes the file. The soft click sounds louder than any gavel. The power dynamic has inverted completely, not through confrontation or emotion, but through truth. The teenager remains seated, composed as ever. The millionaire remains seated too, but no longer elevated, no longer untouchable. Just another man facing consequences he never believed would reach him. In that stillness, the boardroom understands something profound. Control is fragile. Authority is temporary. And the truth, when finally acknowledged, doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be confirmed. The power shift doesn't announce itself with applause or raised voices. It unfolds quietly, the way real authority always does, through procedure, acknowledgement, and irreversible decisions. The senior board member straightens in their chair, glancing around the table before speaking again, this time not as a mediator, but as a representative of the institution. With the confirmation complete, they say, the board formally recognizes you as the rightful heir and controlling shareholder under the founder's trust. The words are deliberate, official, final. They gesture toward her, not dramatically, but with respect, and invite her to take the seat traditionally reserved for majority stakeholders. It's a subtle motion, but everyone understands what it means. That chair has always symbolized influence. Until this moment, only one person in the room ever assumed it belonged to him. She rises calmly and moves to the seat without hesitation. No rush, no hesitation, no performance. As she sits, something fundamental shifts. Conversations that once revolved around the millionaire now orbit her presence. Eyes follow her, not out of curiosity anymore, but recognition. The board doesn't just see her, they acknowledge her. Titles, age, appearance, all of it fades in the face of legitimacy. And then the focus turns. Legal counsel clears their throat and pivots slightly, directing attention back toward the millionaire. With this confirmation, they say evenly, we need to address prior decisions made under the assumption of ownership that we now know was incorrect. The phrase is clinical, but its implications are devastating. Documents are referenced. Votes re-examined. Authorizations questioned. A timeline appears on the screen, highlighting key decisions he championed: mergers, restructures, dismissals, actions taken while asserting authority he never legally possessed. None of it is framed as accusation. It doesn't need to be. Facts are more damaging than blame. A board member speaks up, hesitant but firm. You assured us you had verified standing when those decisions were made. Another adds quietly, you discouraged further review. The millionaire finally speaks, voice strained. He claims misunderstanding. He says the trust was obscure, poorly documented, overlooked by prior counsel. He insists there was no intent to mislead. But the room isn't engaging with excuses. They're engaging with consequences. Legal counsel notes inconsistencies. A compliance officer flags procedural violations. The board doesn't raise voices. They don't argue. They correct him in front of everyone. Each correction strips away a layer of the authority he once wielded effortlessly. Subtle consequences begin unfolding immediately. An internal review is announced. Certain powers are suspended pending audit. Committees he once controlled are reassigned. Decisions he pushed through without resistance are now marked for reevaluation. No one says the word removal, but it lingers in the air, unspoken and heavy. He sits there, absorbing it in silence. The man who once filled the room with certainty now seems smaller, not physically, but institutionally. His posture tightens. His eyes avoid contact. The board no longer looks to him for cues. They don't wait for his approval before speaking. They don't soften language for his comfort. The shift is complete. Then, for the first time since being formally acknowledged, the teen speaks not to defend herself, not to accuse him, but to address the room. She thanks the board for verifying the records. Her voice is steady, unhurried. She says she understands the shock of the revelation and acknowledges the complexity of legacy and history. She doesn't reference the mockery. She doesn't call out the disrespect. She doesn't need to. She states her intention clearly, to honor the founder's vision while ensuring accountability moving forward. She speaks about transparency, about stewardship, about responsibility that comes with inheritance, not privilege. Every word is measured. The contrast is unmistakable. Where arrogance once dominated, dignity now defines the room. Where volume once substituted for authority, clarity now commands attention. The board listens, not because they must, but because they recognize leadership when it finally reveals itself. She ends simply, saying she looks forward to working with those committed to the company's integrity. No threats, no triumph, just resolve. The millionaire doesn't respond. He can't. The room has already moved on. Power has shifted not through confrontation, but through confirmation. Not through force, but through truth. And as the meeting proceeds under new authority, one reality becomes undeniable. The person who entered the building underestimated has just reshaped its future, while the man who mocked her begins quietly, inexorably to fade from the center he once controlled. When the meeting finally comes to an end, nothing about the room looks different. The table is still polished. The chairs are still aligned. The city still stretches endlessly beyond the glass walls. And yet, everything has changed. Not because someone raised their voice, not because authority was challenged head-on, but because assumptions, quiet, comfortable, unquestioned, were forced to confront reality. From the moment she walked into that building, the truth was at risk of being erased. Not through evidence or logic, but through dismissal. People decided who she was before she ever spoke. They labeled her presence a mistake, her confidence a misunderstanding, her claim an inconvenience. And those assumptions almost worked. They nearly ended the story before it began. Because in rooms like that, disbelief can be just as powerful as denial. What this moment reveals is something deeper than a single confrontation. It exposes how often power hides behind appearance, how authority is mistaken for correctness, how confidence is confused with legitimacy. The millionaire looked powerful because he had always been treated that way. His voice carried weight because people expected it to. But when the records were opened, when facts were laid bare, that power evaporated. Not dramatically, but completely. And in contrast, the person with the least visible power in the room turned out to be the one holding the truth all along. Power doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always arrive with titles, wealth, or recognition. Sometimes it walks quietly into a room, sits patiently, and waits to be acknowledged. Sometimes it looks young. Sometimes it looks underestimated. And sometimes it's ignored until ignoring it becomes impossible. That's the uncomfortable question this story leaves behind. How many times do we dismiss people because they don't match our expectations? How often do we confuse familiarity with credibility or appearance with authority? How many truths have gone unheard simply because they came from someone society didn't expect to be right? The boardroom didn't fail because it lacked intelligence or experience. It failed because it relied on assumption instead of verification. It trusted tone over truth. And it took a moment of pause, one decision to check the records for everything to change. This isn't just a story about wealth or inheritance. It's about listening, about humility, about the courage to stop a room and say, let's make sure. Because the truth doesn't need permission to exist, but it often needs someone willing to acknowledge it. The most powerful moment in that room wasn't the confirmation, or the consequences, or even the recognition. It was the silence that followed. The silence where arrogance had nothing left to say. The silence where certainty gave way to reality. The silence where a person once mocked was finally seen. And that silence should make us uncomfortable, because it asks us to look inward, to examine the times we've laughed something off, the times we've assumed we already knew the outcome, the times we've underestimated someone because of how they looked, spoke, or showed up. So ask yourself, honestly, what would you have done in that boardroom? Would you have laughed along? Looked away? Stayed silent? Or would you have been the one to pause the room and ask for the truth? Because moments like this don't just reveal who holds power. They reveal who we choose to listen to. The room didn't change because she spoke louder. It changed because the truth finally spoke for itself. Now tell us, what would you have done?